I know that the issue of gun control is hard. I know it's political. I know it's controversial. But we are proposing today common sense measures. And I say to you, forget the extremists. It's simple. No one hunts with an assault rifle. No one needs 10 bullets to kill a deer.
Couple of questions for you, and sorry if they seem a little nitpicky or detailed, but we didn't get this bill till very late last night, and that's what happens when things get rushed through around here. So we're kind of still digesting some of this. So a couple of questions for you. On the magazines being dropped, the magazine limit being dropped from 10 to 7.
Yes.
Simple question is why? Why are we limiting law-abiding citizens' ability to defend themselves in a home invasion by 30%?
I think the short answer to that, Bill, is that if you have a magazine with only 7 bullets, it will limit the amount of people you could unlawfully kill.
Well, that's true. It also would limit the ability to defend yourself, would it not, from people that are invading your home?
Change the clip.
Change the clip. I'm sure the people who are under invasion will be thrilled to hear that. Change the clip. We heard a senator say that the other day on the radio. Change the magazine, or change the clip and call the police. That'll work great in rural Albany County or up in the Adirondacks, where your nearest police may be 60 miles away. So I don't think they'll be too thrilled to hear that response. But I heard you say earlier, and part of the thing that we like is that there's increased penalties for criminals to illegally use weapons. The truth is we already have penalties for illegal use of weapons, do we not?
Yes.
And criminals, being what they are, don't seem to care too much about any penalty. That's why they are, by definition, criminals. So I'm just wondering why we think that this is, after 600 failed gun laws apparently in this state, why this is the magic elixir that is suddenly going to get criminals to pay attention to a law. Isn't it kind of a fallacy to think that? And aren't we just infringing upon law-abiding citizens' rights to keep and bear arms? And I'm not sure what part of will not be or cannot or shall not be infringed is subject to debate or difficult to understand, but are we not just infringing upon the law-abiding citizen?
No, we're not. I think you're mistaken in that this bill has a two-pronged approach. It raises the penalties for criminals.
Mm-hmm.
You're right about that. And it also tries, as best we can, as a state, because, this province should belong to the federal government. But like other places in our law, they haven't acted. So we believe that it's up to us to lead the way.
Could have been done.
The governor is trying to save lives, and I have to commend him for that.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about saving lives. As my colleague pointed out, 769 homicides, which have been dropping year after year after year. Now, I know next year when they drop again, people will talk about how this ban did it. It won't have anything to do with it, hardly, because only 5 were caused by long guns. Long guns, not assault rifles. May have been 5 at maximum, might have been 2, might have been 1, might have been none, we don't know, but it was 5. So if this is about saving lives, why aren't you going after handguns, which are by and large overwhelmingly the problem and overwhelmingly the weapon of choice among gang members? Why not? And doesn't that sort of lack a little bit of integrity to go after point? Hold on.
We are going after handguns. We are going after handguns. We've done that before, and we're doing it again in this bill.
What handgun?
We've made it a C-violent felony to have a handgun in the state of New York.
Illegally.
Illegally.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about?
So you think that the criminals are going to pay attention to that because now it's a Class C felony?
Well, what do you want to do? You want to make it...
I'm simply saying that you're making the point that you want to save lives, and if you were truly interested in doing that, you'd be having an argument about banning all weapons, number one, which I don't agree with, but you'd be having that argument, because that would, yeah, that would be an actually valid argument to have, that we should ban all weapons. It'd be a complete violation of the Second Amendment, but apparently that's trivial anymore. But what I'm saying here is, it lacks a little bit, or it smacks a little bit of grandstanding to say that we're going to go after these assault weapons, which cause statistically across the nation, and it's the same holds true in New York, assault weapons are used in 1/5, 0.2% of all violent crime, and in about 1% of gun crimes. 1 to 7% of all homicides in the U.S. are caused by assault weapons. So don't kid yourself that we're going after the real issue here, because we're not. There's no
We've talked a little bit about the data from the DCJS, the Department of Criminal Justice Services, that indicate that in 2011, 5 people were killed with a rifle. Do you know how many of those 5 murders with a rifle involved an assault weapon?
I don't know, I'm sorry.
The data from DCJS also indicated that there were 393 murders with a handgun. Do you know how many of those handguns would be affected by this ban?
I don't know.
The governor mentioned in, I believe in the State of the State message, that he thought there were 1 million people that own these kinds of guns. Is that the number that you're familiar with as well?
I don't think he came up with that number out of the air. I think the state police and DCJS probably gave them the best information they have at their disposal now.
So you think 1 million is a reasonable estimate of how many gun owners that will be affected by this legislation?
I'll take him at his word.
I would as well. If we have 1 million of these gun owners out there with these guns, but only 5 murders were committed last year, statistically, aren't these guns much, much safer than cars or motorcycles or bicycles? As you know, the New York Times reported that 55 people were killed by subways in New York City last year. 11 times more people were killed by subways than by a rifle. That would suggest that subways are a lot more dangerous than rifles. And I agree, and we're all concerned about that. If this legislation were in effect, say, a month ago, would it have prevented what happened at Webster?
At where?
At Webster.
What is it? Webster. No, I don't think so.
Do you think if this legislation were in effect here in New York State a month ago, it would have prevented what happened in Sandy Hook, Connecticut?
No.
As you know, the Columbine tragedy, which was a horrific tragedy, of course, that occurred.
Let me just let me amend that statement, because Sandy Hook could have been prevented if the parent was the one who owned the weapons.
Well, the parent did own the weapons
Yes.
in Sandy Hook.
Yes, the parent owned the weapons, and under the safe storage provision of this bill, it might have been locked up as a result of, if the child had disability, mental disability issues that were known to the parent, there might have been a requirement for that weapon to be locked up.
Well, as you know, the safe storage provisions under this bill aren't triggered by a parent knowing that their child is has mental issues, it's triggered by very specific criteria, right? Yeah, it's
Right.
institutionalized. None of those criteria applied in Sandy Hook, did they?
That's
Senator Gillibrand was quoted a few weeks ago saying that, according to FBI statistics, 90% of the guns recovered in New York City in crime scenes came from outside of New York State, and 70% upstate. Is that your understanding as
Yeah.
well? So what we're talking about is dealing with 5 rifles, of which statistically 4 of them would have come from outside the state anyway? So we're talking about maybe dealing with 1 murder?
where
This
they,
is the necessity that causes us to get bills at midnight? Mr. Lentil, as I understand this bill, we expand the definition of assault weapons, but we allow everyone who has a weapon that today is legal, but tomorrow would be defined as an assault weapon, to keep that weapon. Is that correct?
that's correct.
There's no confiscation,
None.
there's no buyback, there's no elimination of these guns.
That's correct.
So all these guns that this bill would make illegal today will still be out in the public tomorrow, correct?
Well, what would be illegal is if the person who has a right to have the gun and registers it tries to sell it to somebody in New York.
But he has a year to register it, so
That's right.
between this morning when I got up and all these guns were legal, and if this passes tomorrow when they're all illegal, all these guns covered by this, they're still out there, right?
That's right.
So why was this such a necessity that we adopt this legislation today and that we not get the legislation? I didn't get a copy of it till nearly midnight. What is the emergency that changes this whole dynamic?
I think the emergency exists in beginning to register these weapons so that we have a handle on them.
So if we waited till Friday to register them, there would be some sort of catastrophic event other than the fact that the federal
No.
government might beat us to this registration
No,
requirement?
I think the haste is the faster we get it, hopefully the faster we can prevent other crimes.
Is there any emergent situation, though, between today, Tuesday, and Thursday or Friday of this week that would have enabled us time to get copies of this legislation out to our constituents and to reach out to affected groups and get their advice and counsel?
I don't think we know the answer to that question. All I can tell you is that it would be a tragedy, wouldn't it, if we waited till next week to do it, and we had a shooting in a school by somebody who owned a banned assault rifle?
Indeed, I think it would be a tragedy, and of course, this legislation wouldn't prevent that, would it? Because all those guns are still going to be out there on the street tomorrow, right?
True, but we have at least a registration of those who have the weapons so that we can check to determine whether or not they have disqualified themselves from having the weapon because of
But
mental
as-
incapacity or some
But
other
as we
factor.
noted, that they have a year to do that registration.
That's right.
Right.
So the
So,
longer we wait, the longer we don't get the information.
so we're really concerned about that time period between January 15th, 2014 and January 17th, 2014, right? That extra 3 days at the end of the one-year registration. Now, if you have one of the weapons which you bought today, lawfully, legally, here in New York State, and is outlawed, say, tomorrow by this bill, am I correct that you cannot transfer it to anyone in New York State other than a licensed gun dealer?
Yes.
What happens when you die? Now you're a grieving widow or widower, assuming that they didn't kill you with it, but now your estate owns these guns. What does the estate do?
I think that the administrator or the executor of the estate would have the power to sell that weapon to somebody out of state.
So we are exporting what we consider to be dangerous weapons to other states, our neighboring states like Connecticut, for
Not
example?
we, the administrator.
The administrator. So it's okay for the administrator then to sell this to, you know, somebody else in Connecticut or Colorado or somewhere outside the state? That's our solution?
But would you support an absolute ban? This is...
Not at all. I favor the Second Amendment. I'm just trying to figure out how this would work. How long does the estate have to sell?
I'm just trying to devise ways for you as to what would happen to that weapon or what could be, you know, reasonably done with it by the widower and through the administration of the estate.
Right, I'm just
Of
questioning.
course, it could be destroyed.
And but you can't just give it to your son, can you?
No.
That would be illegal. Even though your son could use it lawfully as long as you were alive, is that
It would be
correct?
held by law enforcement for 1 year. I'm told it would be held by law enforcement for 1 year.
And at the 1 year, it would be confiscated?
Could be sold.
So-
If it's not sold during the year, it would be destroyed.
And does the estate get any reimbursement for the value of this weapon that is destroyed?
No.
Now, am I correct that the day before you die, you could go hunting with your son or daughter and they could use this weapon lawfully in the United States, in New York State rather?
Say that again?
Am I correct that if you lawfully own these guns, you can go hunting or target shooting with your son or daughter as long as you are alive?
Yes.
But if you die, then they can't even own them?
Right.
All right. It just seems a little strange to me.